Hello everyone, my name is Derek and welcome to the Netflix Knowhow, the movie review show here to help you stop browsing and start watching. Today we are going to be taking a look at the Norwegian film Trollhunter, the offbeat superhero comedy Super, and the stylistic and surreal thriller The Double. So grab some drinks, grab a chair, and let's jump on into the Netflix verse. First up is Trollhunter, an international action and adventure film written and directed by... Okay, first thing, hooray! It's my first foreign film! Second thing, I don't speak Norwegian, so I'm going to do my best to pronounce these names, but I just wanted to apologize in advance. Anyway, written and directed by André Øvredal and starring Otto Jespersen, Glenn Erland Tosterud, Johanna Mørck, and Tomas Larsen. The Netflix synopsis reads, 3 students enter the Norwegian woods to film a documentary on a bear poacher who claims that he really tracks trolls for the Norwegian government. So, turns out trolls exist. Okay, maybe they don't, but with the amount of sincerity and fictional research presented in this film, I would not at all be surprised if they actually did exist. It's kind of misleading that this film is labeled as an action and adventure movie because it's really more of a found footage mockumentary that just so happens to be about trolls. Don't get me wrong, there are quite a few thrilling action sequences involving the monstrous beasts, but for me, the bits in between where they were discussing the history of the trolls, the different types, their anatomy, and even the government involvement to cover them up were by far the most interesting parts. In a film that features giant monsters roaming the Norwegian countryside, it's quite a testament to the film's quality that they somehow managed to make the information about the trolls somehow more interesting than the actual trolls themselves. I think a lot of that has to do with the actual Trollhunter character himself, who is portrayed as this weary, weathered military veteran who's been doing this business for so long that nothing phases him anymore. Tracking and hunting trolls is as mundane to him as washing the dishes is to everyone else, and his apathetic, matter-of-fact attitude brings a sense of dry humor that is welcome in a character that could have easily fallen victim to the eccentric weirdo trope. As for the trolls, well, they're expectedly stupid, but they sure look pretty darn good for a relatively low-budget indie movie. Granted, many of the shots involving the trolls featured only fleeting or obscured images of them, but there were a few long, wide takes that I was thoroughly impressed with, especially towards the final act of the movie. There's also a subplot about a man from the government agency known as the TSS. I'll let you find out for yourself what that stands for. His job is to basically cover up all evidence suggesting the existence of trolls, and it's hilarious watching him attempt to explain away things in a fashion similar to a politician trying to justify their poor decisions. I did find the student film crew to be on the generic side, and I did find it a bit odd that they accepted the existence of trolls so quickly when, prior to meeting this hunter, they all believed that trolls were nothing more than a work of old fairy tales. There was also a weird thing about trolls having a scathing hatred for Christians, which I thought was an interesting idea, but by the end it felt just like an arbitrarily tacked on footnote, and they never actually went anywhere with it. The ending was pretty anticlimactic too, and it felt like a rushed cop-out that didn't do anything to resolve any of the plot lines or do justice to the main Trollhunter character. But those are minor complaints for what is otherwise a truly unique and exciting movie experience, and one that's far more fascinating than it really has any right to be. Thumbs up. Next up is Super, an action and adventure movie written and directed by James Gunn and starring Rainn Wilson, Ellen Page, Liv Tyler, and Kevin Bacon. The Netflix synopsis reads, when his wife falls in league with a drug dealer, average guy Frank Darbo dons the guise of a superhero and dubs himself the Crimson Bolt. Look, I understand the appeal of wanting to be a real-life superhero, but guns are a thing, guys. They kinda hurt. A lot. I do want to address the parallels between this film and Kick-Ass, namely that both films feature a bumbling everyman who makes the jump into crime-fighting superhero-dom with only a silly suit on his back and a blunt object at his side. However, where Kick-Ass was a gleeful, adventurous, over-the-top ride, Super is a much more pessimistic and personal film, and it seems to treat the actual heroic transformation as a symptom of mental instability. There are a lot of things going on with this movie that I definitely enjoyed, but there are also a lot of problems that I felt really detracted from the overall experience. The cast is fantastic, with Rainn Wilson's portrayal as Frank evoking a heartbreaking sense of loss, desperation, and confusion as he tries to find meaning in not only the betrayal of his wife, but the disappointing reality of his life as a whole. Kevin Bacon plays a charismatic drug dealer that is easy to hate but impossible not to love, and Ellen Page brings a hilarious level of politically incorrect sass and violent enthusiasm as Frank's unwitting sidekick, Bolty. The tone, however, is completely scatterbrained. One moment the movie is playing as an off-kilter indie comedy, and then it turns into a dark and brooding character drama, and then it takes some acid and turns into a zany cartoon comic panel, and then by the time the show is up, we find ourselves in the midst of a violent and bloody war zone. It's incredibly disorienting, and more often than not, it's all of these things at the same time, and it left me with no solid ground to plant myself on. Despite the constant tonal shifts, I can't deny that the humor in this film is wonderfully awkward, refreshingly unconventional, and surprisingly bizarre on occasion. I think it's best summed up in the scene where Frank discovers his weapon of choice. I won't say too much so as not to spoil the comedic effect, but all you need to know is that Frank is a simple man with simple pleasures, and I would not be surprised if he took inspiration from the great Gallagher himself. It's too bad that the writing doesn't take the time to properly hammer out the many unresolved plot threads and side stories scattered along the way. There are all kinds of interesting subplots and seemingly key elements introduced throughout the film, and I kept waiting for the story to come back to them, but it never does. And by the time the end credits rolled, it felt like I had honestly been cheated out of half of a movie. The worst part about this is that it robs any sense of consequence from the characters' actions, and if nothing they do winds up mattering in the end, what reason should I have to care from the beginning? On top of that, the characters were just not given enough space to be properly developed. And when some pretty heavy stuff goes down in the final act of the movie, I discovered that I wasn't exactly invested in the fate of anyone. I do think Super is a passionately made movie, and I definitely respect the creative originality of writer-director James Gunn, but the brazen tonal shifts and abandoned plot threads left me feeling just as lost and confused as the Crimson Bolt himself. Thumbs down. Finally, we have The Double, a comedy thriller written and directed by Richard Ayoade and starring Jesse Eisenberg, Mia Wasikowska, and Wallace Shawn. The Netflix synopsis reads, life takes a strange turn for a timid office worker when a new employee turns out to be his doppelganger, but more outgoing and charismatic. A strange turn indeed, although this film is pretty strange from the get-go, but in the most enjoyable of ways. This movie is kind of like a mix between the cult favorite Fight Club and the dystopian masterpiece Brazil if they were both filtered through a film noir lens with a deadpan sense of humor. I know that seems like a lot to process, but it's not as intimidating as it sounds, and the end result is a finely tuned piece of social satire that deconstructs the trappings of corporate culture and examines the psychological effects of being reduced to an indistinct cog in the capitalist machine. Perhaps the most brilliant aspect of this movie is that it's constructed in such a way that it could be a story about every single one of us. Whether it has happened already, has yet to occur, or it's something you are dealing with at this very moment, we all experience periods in our life where we feel imprisoned in our situation and disheartened by our circumstances. We are constantly struggling to find our place in the world around us and to develop a sense of identity and self-worth in our existence, and it is these themes and emotions that the film explores. The actual doppelganger is presented not as a direct opposite to the main character, but more as the ideal version of himself, one that possesses not only the qualities he desires, but qualities that position him favorably for progression in the uncaring world surrounding him. He is caught in a vicious tug of war between being a nobody with integrity or a somebody without morality, and the struggle to figure out who he really is nearly comes at the cost of his entire identity. I think that constant battle between an actual self versus an idealized self is something that we can all relate to, and I, for one, know just how easy it can be to lose sight of who we really are. The physical design of the film world is also a thematic masterpiece, shown as a run-down, washed-out landscape of yellows, browns, and grays, and cloaked in stark shadows that create a claustrophobic atmosphere devoid of hope. It's as if the warm light of the sun has been outlawed in this land, and the very soul of the world and its inhabitants have been sucked dry by their corporate overlords. What's really amazing about this film is that it's only a meager 90 minutes, and yet it's overflowing with rich social commentary, subversive themes, and engrossing character drama. It honestly feels like a much bigger movie than it is, which is fitting considering the scale and scope of the ideas at play here. One minor complaint that I do have is that it does seem to drag just a bit in the beginning, and it took me a little while to really become acclimated to the strange environment and become invested in the stories and characters. Once I was there though, it was game on. The Double is certainly not a film for everyone, and I can understand that it might be a little too strange and stylistic for some to get behind, but the timely subject matter, relatable characters, and claustrophobic atmosphere all combine for an absolutely superb piece of dark cultural satire. Thumbs up. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and watching. I really appreciate all of your support. If you like this video and you want to see more, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. You can also follow me on Facebook, so be sure to head on over there. And I'm going to have a Twitter account set up at some point. I'm not sure when, but I will let you guys know when I have that up and running. So yeah, I think that's all I have for you today. And as always, if you want to know your flicks, you know where to click. There, it's in that corner. I knew that. I'm not always good at this, all right? Happy hunting, guys. See you next week.